Hi. Happy, what's today? That looks bad. Tuesday. Happy Tuesday. It's a little bit better. Hope everyone is having a great day. This will be, I think, a little bit shorter than usual today. Once again, we're just gonna wait for the thing to kick in so I don't have to do it all again later. We will not be reading tomorrow. I am gone. However, weather is looking great. Sun is shining. Missed the blood moon last night, so I'm a little upset about that, but it is what it is. So let's get into it. We are continuing to read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. And this is chapter, 14? A Note of Innovation. The next day was the 9th of November. I awoke after a long sleep of 12 hours. I just want to make sure we didn't skip a chapter. The next day was the 9th of November. I awoke after a long sleep of 12 hours. Conseil came, according to custom, to know how I had passed the night and to offer his services. He had left his friend the Canadian sleeping like a man who had never done anything else all his life. I let the worthy fellow chatter as he pleased without caring to answer him. I was preoccupied by the absence of the captain during our sitting of the day before and hoping to see him today. As soon as I was dressed, I went into the saloon. It was deserted. I plunged into the study of the conchological treasures hidden behind the glasses. I reveled also in great herbals filled with the rarest marine plants, which, although dried up, retained their lovely colors. Amongst these precious hydrophytes, I remarked some vorticellae, pavonare, delicate cerames with scarlet tints, some fan-shaped agari, and some natabuli, like flat mushrooms, which at one time used to be classed as zoophytes. In short, a perfect series of algae. In short, what a way to start the chapter with things I again cannot pronounce. Hello. The whole day passed without my being honored by a visit from Captain Nemo. The panels of the saloon did not open. Perhaps they did not wish us to tire of these beautiful things. The course of the Nautilus was east-northeast, her speed 12 knots, the depth below the surface between 25 and 30 fathoms. The next day, the 10th of November, the same desertion, the same solitude. I did not see one of the ship's crew. Ned and Conseil spent the greater part of the day with me. They were astonished at the inexplicable absence of the captain. Was this singular man ill? Had he altered his intentions with regard to us? After all, as Conseil said, we enjoyed perfect liberty. We were delicately and abundantly fed. Our host kept to his terms of the treaty. We could not complain, and indeed, the singularity of our fate reserved such wonderful compensation for us that we had no right to accuse it as yet. That day, I commenced the journal of these adventures, which has enabled me to relate them with more scrupulous exactitude and minute detail. I wrote it on paper made from Zostera marina. 11th November, early in the morning. The fresh air spreading over the interior of the Nautilus told me that we had come to the surface of the ocean to renew our supply of oxygen. I directed my steps to the central staircase and mounted the platform. It was 6 o'clock. The weather was cloudy, the sea gray but calm, scarcely a billow. Captain Nemo, whom I hoped to meet, would he be there? I saw no one but the steersman imprisoned in his glass cage. Seated upon the projection formed by the hull of the pinnacle, I inhaled the salt breeze with delight. By degrees, the fog disappeared under the action of the sun's rays. The radiant orb rose from behind the eastern horizon. The sea flamed under its glance like a train of gunpowder. The clouds, scattered in the height, were colored with lively tints of beautiful shades and numerous mare's tails, which betokened wind for that day. But what was wind to this Nautilus, which tempests could not frighten? I was admiring this joyous rising of the sun, so gay and so life-giving, when I heard steps approaching the platform. I was prepared to salute Captain Nemo, but it was his second, whom I had already seen on the captain's first visit, who appeared. He advanced on the platform, not seeming to see me. With his powerful glass to his eye, he scanned every point of the horizon with great attention. This examination over, he approached the panel and pronounced a sentence in exactly these terms. I have remembered it, for every morning it was repeated under exactly the same conditions. It was thus worded, Nautron respok lorni verk. What this meant, I could not say, nor me. These words pronounced, the second descended. I thought that the Nautilus was about to return to its submarine navigation. I regained the panel and returned to my chamber. 5 days sped thus without any change in our situation. Every morning I mounted the platform. The same phrase was pronounced by the same individual, but Captain Nemo did not appear. I had made up my mind that I should never see him again when, on the 16th of November, on returning to my room with Ned and Conseil, I found upon my table a note addressed to me. I opened it impatiently. It was written in a bold, clear hand, the characters rather pointed, recalling the German type. The note was worded as follows. To Professor Aronnax on board the Nautilus, 16 of November, 1867. Captain Nemo invites Professor Aronnax to a hunting party, which will take place tomorrow morning in the forests of the island of Crespo. He hopes that nothing will prevent the professor from being present, and he will, with the pleasure, see him joined by his companions. Captain Nemo, commander of the Nautilus. A hunt, exclaimed Ned, and in the forests of the island of Crespo, added Conseil. Oh, then the gentleman is going on terra firma? Replied Ned Land. That seems to me to be clearly indicated, said I, reading the letter once more. Well, we must accept, said the captain, but once more on dry ground we shall know what to do. Indeed, I shall not be sorry to eat a piece of fresh venison. Without seeking to reconcile what was contradictory between Captain Nemo's manifest aversion to islands and continents and his invitation to hunt in a forest, I contented myself with replying, Let us first see where the island of Crespo is. I consulted the planisphere, and in 32 degrees 40 north latitude and 157 degrees 50 west longitude, I found a small island, recognized in 1801 by Captain Crespo, and marked in the ancient Spanish maps as Roca de la Plata, the meaning of which is the Silver Rock. We were then about 1,800 miles from our starting point, and the course of the Nautilus, a little changed, was bringing it back towards the southeast. I showed this little rock lost in the midst of the North Pacific to my companions. If Captain Nemo does sometimes go on dry land, said I, he at least chooses desert islands. Ned Land shrugged his shoulders without speaking, and Conseil and he left me. After supper, which was served by the steward, mute and impassive, I went to bed, not without some anxiety. The next morning, the 17th of November, on awakening, I felt that the Nautilus was perfectly still. I dressed quickly and entered the saloon. Captain Nemo was there, waiting for me. He rose, bowed, and asked me if it was convenient for me to accompany him. As he made no allusion to his absence during the last 8 days, I did not mention it, and simply answered that my companions and myself were ready to follow him. We entered the dining room where breakfast was served. Monsieur Aronnax, said the captain, pray share my breakfast without ceremony. We will chat as we eat. For though I promised you a walk in the forest, I do not undertake to find hotels there. So breakfast as a man who will most likely not have his dinner till very late. I did honor to the repast. It composed of several kinds of fish and slices of holothuridae, excellent zoophytes, and different sorts of seaweed. Our drink consisted of pure water, to which the captain added some drops of a fermented liquor extracted by the Kamchatka method from a seaweed known under the name of Rhodomenia palmata. Captain Nemo ate it first without saying a word. Then he began. Sir, when I proposed to you to hunt in my submarine forest of Crespo, you evidently thought me mad. Sir, you should never judge light of any man. But, Captain, believe me, be kind enough to listen, and you will then see whether you have any cause to accuse me of folly and contradiction. I listen. You know as well as I do, Professor, that man can live under water, providing he carries with him a sufficient supply of breathable air. In submarine works, the workman, clad in an impervious dress, with his head in a metal helmet, receives air from above by means of forcing pumps and regulators. That is a diving apparatus, said I. Just so. But under these conditions, the man is not at liberty. He is attached to the pump, which sends him air through an India rubber tube. And if we were obliged to be thus held to the Nautilus, we could not go far. And the means of getting free? I asked. It is to use the Rouquayrol apparatus, invented by 2 of your own countrymen, which I have brought to perfection for my own use, and which will allow you to risk yourself under these new physiological conditions without any organ whatever suffering. It consists of a reservoir of thick iron plates in which I store the air under a pressure of 50 atmospheres. This reservoir is fixed on the back by means of braces, like a soldier's knapsack. Its upper part forms a box in which the air is kept by means of a bellows, and therefore cannot escape unless at its normal tension. In the Rouquayrol apparatus, such as we use, 2 India rubber pipes leave this box and join a sort of tent which holds the nose and mouth. One is to introduce fresh air, the other to let out the foul, and the tongue closes one or the other according to the wants of the respirator. But I, in encountering great pressure at the bottom of the sea, was obliged to shut my head like that of a diver in a ball of copper, and it is to this ball of copper that the 2 pipes, the inspirator and the expirator, open. Perfectly, Captain Nemo, but the air that you carry with you must soon be used. When it only contains 15% of oxygen, it is no longer fit to breathe. Right, but I told you, Monsieur Aronnax, that the pumps of the Nautilus allow me to store the air under considerable pressure, and on those conditions, the reservoir of the apparatus can furnish breathable air for 9 or 10 hours. I have no further objections to make, I answered. I will only ask you one thing, Captain. How can you light your road at the bottom of the sea? With the Ruhmkorff apparatus, Monsieur Aronnax. One is carried on the back, the other is fastened to the waist. It is composed of a Bunsen pile, which I do not work with bichromate of potash, but with sodium. A wire is introduced which collects the electricity produced, and it directs it towards a particularly made lantern. In this lantern is a spiral glass which contains a small quantity of carbonic gas. When the apparatus is at work, this gas becomes luminous, giving out a white and continuous light. Thus provided, I can breathe and I can see. Captain Nemo, to all my objections you make such crushing answers that I dare no longer doubt. But if I am forced to admit the Rouquayrol and Ruhmkorff apparatus, I must be allowed some reservations with regard to the gun I am to carry. But it is not a gun for powder, answered the captain. Then it is an air gun. Doubtless. How would you have me manufacture gunpowder on board, without either saltpeter, sulfur, or charcoal? Besides, I added, to fire under water in a medium 855 times denser than the air, we must conquer very considerable resistance. That would be no difficulty. There exist guns, according to Fulton, perfected in England by Philip Coles and Burley, in France by Ferzi, and in Italy by Landi, which are furnished with a peculiar system of closing, which can fire under these conditions. But I repeat, having no powder, I use air under great pressure, which the pumps of the Nautilus furnish abundantly. But this air must be rapidly used? Well, have I not my Rouquayrol reservoir, which can furnish it at need? A tap is all that is required. Besides, Monsieur Aronnax, you must see yourself that, during our submarine hunt, we can spend but little air and but few balls. But it seems to me that in this twilight, and in the midst of this fluid, which is very dense compared with the atmosphere, shots could not go far, nor easily prove mortal. So, on the contrary, with this gun every blow is mortal, and however lightly the animal is touched, it falls as if struck by a thunderbolt. Why? Because the balls sent by this gun are not ordinary balls, but little cases of glass, invented by Leinbreck, an Austrian chemist, of which I have a large supply. These glass cases are covered with a case of steel and weighted with a pellet of lead. They are real Leyden bottles into which the electricity is forced to a very high tension. With the slightest shock, they are discharged, and the animal, however strong it may be, falls dead. I must tell you that these cases are size number 4, and that the charge of an ordinary gun would be 10. I will argue no further, I replied, rising from the table. I have nothing left but to take my gun. At all events, I will go wherever you go. Captain Nemo then led me aft, and in passing before Ned and Conseil's cabin, I called my 2 companions, who followed immediately. We then came to a kind of cell near the machinery room in which we were to put on our walking dress. Chapter 15. A Walk on the Bottom of the Sea. This cell was, to speak correctly, the arsenal and wardrobe of the Nautilus. A dozen diving apparatuses hung from the partition waiting our use. Ned Land, on seeing them, showed evident repugnance to dress himself in one. "But, my worthy Ned, the forests of the island of Crespo are nothing but submarine forests." "Good," said the disappointed harpooner, who saw his dreams of fresh meat fade away. "And you, Monsieur Aronnax, are you going to dress yourself in these clothes?" "There is no alternative, Master Ned." "As you please, sir," replied the harpooner, shrugging his shoulders. "But as for me, unless I am forced, I will never get into one." "No one will force you, Master Ned," said Captain Nemo. "Is Conseil going to risk it?" asked Ned. "I will follow my master wherever he goes," replied Conseil. At the captain's call, 2 of the ship's crew came to help us to dress in these heavy and impervious clothes, made of India rubber without seam and constructed expressly to resist considerable pressure. One would have thought it a suit of armor, both supple and resisting. This suit formed trousers and waistcoat. The trousers were finished off with thick boots, weighted with heavy leaden soles. The texture of the waistcoat was held together by bands of copper, which crossed the chest, protecting it from the great pressure of the water and leaving the lungs free to act. The sleeves ended in gloves, which in no way restrained the movement of the hands. There was a vast difference noticeable between these consummate apparatuses and the old cork breastplates, jackets, and other contrivances in vogue during the 18th century. Captain Nemo and one of his companions, a sort of Hercules who must have possessed great strength, Conseil and myself were soon enveloped in the dresses. There remained nothing more to be done but to enclose our heads in the metal box. Horrifying. But before proceeding to this operation, I asked the captain's permission to examine the guns we were to carry. One of the Nautilus men gave me a simple gun, the butt end of which, made of steel, hollow in the center, was rather large. It served as a reservoir for compressed air, which a valve, worked by a spring, allowed to escape into a metal tube. A box of projectiles in a groove in the thickness of the butt end contained about 20 of these electric balls, which, by means of a spring, were forced into the barrel of the gun. As soon as one shot was fired, another was ready. "Captain Nemo," said I, "this arm is perfect and easily handled. I only ask to be allowed to try it. But how shall we gain the bottom of the sea?" "At this moment, Professor, the Nautilus is stranded in 5 fathoms, and we have nothing to do but to start." "But how shall we get off?" "You shall see." Captain Nemo thrust his head into the helmet. Conseil and I did the same, not without hearing an ironical good sport from the Canadian. The upper part of our dress terminated in a copper collar, upon which was screwed the metal helmet. 3 holes, protected by thick glass, allowed us to see in all directions by simply turning our head in the interior of the headdress. As soon as it was in position, the roue-roll apparatus on our backs began to act, and, for my part, I could breathe with ease. With the Ruhmkorff lamp hanging from my belt and the gun in my hand, I was ready to set out. But to speak the truth, imprisoned in these heavy garments and glued to the deck by my leaden soles, it was impossible for me to take a step. But the state of things was provided for. I felt myself being pushed into a little room contiguous to the wardrobe room. My companions followed, towed along in the same way. I heard a watertight door, furnished with stopper plates, close upon us, and we were wrapped in profound darkness. After some minutes, a loud hissing was heard. I felt the cold mount from my feet to my chest. Evidently, from some part of the vessel, they had, by means of a tap, given entrance to the water, which was invading us, and with which the room was soon filled. A second door cut in the side of the Nautilus then opened. We saw a faint light. In another instant, our feet trod the bottom of the sea. And now, how can I retrace the impression left upon me by that walk under the stars? Words are impotent to relate such wonders. Captain Nemo walked in front. His companion followed some steps behind. Conseil and I remained near each other, as if an exchange of words had been possible through our metallic cases. I no longer felt the weight of my clothing, or of my shoes, of my reservoir of air, or my thick helmet, in the midst of which my head rattled like an almond in its shell. The light, which lit the soil 30 feet below the surface of the ocean, astonished me by its power. The solar rays shone through the watery mass easily and dissipated all color, and I clearly distinguished objects at a distance of 150 yards. Beyond that, the tints darkened into fine gradations of ultramarine and faded into vague obscurity. Truly, this water which surrounded me was but another air denser than the terrestrial atmosphere, but almost as transparent. Above me was the calm surface of the sea. We were walking on fine, even sand, not wrinkled, as on a flat shore, which retains the impression of the billows. This dazzling carpet, really a reflector, repelled the rays of the sun with wonderful intensity, which accounted for the vibration which penetrated every atom of liquid. Shall I be believed when I say that, at the depth of 30 feet, I could see as if I was in broad daylight? For a quarter of an hour I trod on the sand, sown with the impalpable dust of shells. The hull of the Nautilus, resembling a long shoal, disappeared by degrees, but its lantern, when darkness should overtake us in the waters, would help to guide us on board by its distinct rays. Soon, forms of objects outlined in the distance were discernible. I recognized magnificent rocks hung with a tapestry of zoophytes in the most beautiful kind, and I was at first struck by the peculiar effect of this medium. It was then 10 in the morning. The rays of the sun struck the surface of the waves at rather an oblique angle, and at the touch of their light, decomposed by refraction as through a prism, flowers, rocks, plants, shells, and polypi were shaded at the edges of the 7 solar colors. Shaded at the edges by the 7 solar colors. It was marvelous, a feast for the eyes, this complication of colored tints, a perfect kaleidoscope of green, yellow, orange, violet, indigo, and blue. In one word, the whole palette of an enthusiastic colorist. Why could I not communicate to Conseil the lively sensations which were mounting to my brain and rival him in expressions of admiration? For aught I knew, Captain Nemo and his companion might be able to exchange thoughts by means of signs previously agreed upon. So, for want of better, I talked to myself. I declaimed in this copper box which covered my head, thereby expending more air in vain words than as perhaps expedient. Various kinds of Isis, clusters. Once again, we are met with a bunch of words that I cannot pronounce, so we're going to work through it together. Various kinds of Isis, clusters of pure tuft coral, prickly fungi, and anemones formed a brilliant garden of flowers, enameled with porphytae, decked with their collarets of blue tentacles, sea stars studding the sea stars. Wow, say that 5 times fast. Sea stars studding the sandy bottom, together with asterophytons like fine lace embroidered by the hands of naiads, whose festoons were waved by the gentle undulations caused by our walk. It was a relief to me to crush under my feet the brilliant specimens of mollusks which strewed the ground by thousands, of hammerheads, of staircases and red helmet shells, angel wings, and many others produced by this inexhaustible ocean. But we were bound to walk, so we went on, whilst above our heads waved shoals of physalides, leaving their tentacles to float in their train, medusae whose umbrellas of opal or rose pink, enscalloped with a band of blue, sheltered us from the rays of the sun, and fiery pelagi, which in the darkness would have strewn our path with phosphorescent light. That wasn't actually so terribly bad. All these wonders I saw in the space of a quarter of a mile, scarcely stopping, and following Captain Nemo, who beckoned me on by signs. Soon the nature of the soil changed. To the sandy plain succeeded an extent of slimy mud, which the Americans call ooze, composed of equal parts of siliceous and calcareous shells. We then traveled over a plain of seaweed of wild and luxuriant vegetation. This sward was of close texture, and soft to the feet, and rivaled the softest carpet woven by the hand of man. But whilst verdure was spread at our feet, it did not abandon our heads. A light network of marine plants, of that inexhaustible family of seaweeds, of which more than 2,000 kinds are known, grew on the surface of the water. Here we go. I saw long ribbons of fucus floating, some globular, others tuberous. Laurenciae and cladostephae of most delicate foliage, and some rhodomenae palmatae, resembling the fan of a cactus. I noticed that the green plants kept nearer the top of the sea, whilst the red were at a greater depth, leaving to the black or brown hydrophytes the care of forming gardens and parterres in the remote beds of the ocean. We had quitted the Nautilus about an hour and a half. It was near noon, I knew by the perpendicularity of the sun's rays, which were no longer refracted. The magical colors disappeared by degrees, and the shades of emerald and sapphire were effaced. We walked with a regular step, which rang upon the ground with astonishing intensity. The slightest noise was transmitted with a quickness to which the ear is unaccustomed on the earth. Indeed, water is a better conductor of sound than air in the ratio of 4:1. At this period, the earth sloped downwards. The light took a uniform tint. We were at a depth of 105 yards and 20 inches, undergoing a pressure of 6 atmospheres. At this depth, I could still see the rays of the sun, though feebly. To their intense brilliancy had succeeded a reddish twilight, the lowest state between day and night. But we could still see well enough. It was not necessary to resort to the Ruhmkorff apparatus as yet. At this moment, Captain Nemo stopped. He waited till I joined him, and then pointed to an obscure mass looming in the shadow at a short distance. It is the forest of the island of Crespo, thought I, and I was not mistaken. Okay, we can do at least one more. Chapter 16, A Submarine Forest. We had at last arrived on the borders of this forest, doubtless one of the finest of Captain Nemo's intense domains. He looked upon it as his own and considered he had the same right over it that the first men had in the first days of the world. And indeed, who would have disputed with him the possession of this submarine property? What other hardier pioneer would come, hatchet in hand, to cut down the dark copses? This forest was composed of large tree plants, and the moment we penetrated under its vast arcades, I was struck by the singular position of their branches, a position I had not yet observed. Not a herb which carpeted the ground, not a branch which clothed the trees, was either broken or bent, nor did they extend horizontally. These are falling. All stretched up to the surface of the ocean. Not a filament, not a ribbon, however thin they might be, but kept as straight as a rod of iron. The fuchsia and lianes grew in rigid perpendicular lines, due to the density of the element which had produced them. Motionless yet, when bent to one side by the hand, they directly resumed their former position. Truly, it was the region of perpendicularity. I soon accustomed myself to this fantastic position, as well as to the comparative darkness which surrounded us. The soil of the forest seemed covered with sharp blocks difficult to avoid. The submarine flora struck me as being very perfect and even richer than it would have been in the Arctic or tropical zones, where these productions are not so plentiful. But for some minutes, I involuntarily confounded the genera, taking zoophytes for hydrophytes, animals for plants, and who would not have been mistaken? The fauna and the flora are too closely allied in this submarine world. These plants are self-propagated, and the pinnacle of their existence is in the water, which upholds and nourishes them. The greater number, instead of leaves, shoot forth blades of capricious shapes, comprised within a scale of colors: pink, carmine, green, olive, fawn, and brown. I saw there, but not dried up, as our specimens of the Nautilus are. Pavonari spread like a fan as if to catch the breeze. Scarlet ceramites, whose liminaries extended their edible shoots of fern-shaped nereocystae, which grow to a height of 15 feet. Clusters of acetabuli, whose systems increase in size upwards, and numbers of other marine plants, all devoid of flowers. Curious anomaly, fantastic element, said an ingenious naturalist, in which the animal kingdom blossoms and the vegetable does not. Under these numerous shrubs, as large trees of the temperate zone, and under their damp shadow, were massed together real bushes of living flowers, hedges of zoophytes on which blossomed some zebramendrines with crooked grooves, some yellow caryophyllae, and to complete the illusion, the fish flies flew from branch to branch like a swarm of hummingbirds, whilst yellow Lepizocomthi, with bristling jaws, Dactyloperi, and monocentrides rose at our feet like a flight of snipes. Like whatever any of that means. In about an hour, Captain Nemo gave the signal to halt. I, for my part, was not sorry, and we stretched ourselves under an arbor of alari, the long thin blades of which stood up like arrows. This short rest seemed delicious to me. There was nothing wanting but the charm of conversation. But impossible to speak, impossible to answer. I only put my great copper head to Conseil's. I saw the worthy fellow's eyes glistening with delight, and to show his satisfaction, he shook himself in his breastplate of air in the most comical way of the world. After 4 hours of this walking, I was surprised not to find myself dreadfully hungry. How to account for the state of the stomach I could not tell. But instead, I felt an insurmountable desire to sleep, which happens to all divers. And my eyes soon closed behind the thick glasses, and I fell into a heavy slumber, which the movement alone had prevented before. Captain Nemo and his robust companion, stretched in the clear crystal, set us the example. How long I remained buried in this drowsiness I cannot judge, but when I woke, the sun seemed sinking towards the horizon. Captain Nemo had already risen, and I was beginning to stretch my limbs when an unexpected apparition brought me briskly to my feet. A few steps off, a monstrous sea spider, about 38 inches in height, was watching me with squinting eyes, ready to spring upon me. Gross. Though my diver's dress was thick enough to defend me from the bite of this animal, I could not help shuddering with horror. Conseil and the sailor of the Nautilus awoke at this moment. Captain Nemo pointed out the hideous crustacean, which a blow from the butt end of the gun knocked over, and I saw the horrible claws of the monster writhe in terrible convulsions. This accident reminded me that other animals, more to be feared, might haunt these obscure depths, against whose attacks my diving dress would not protect me. I had never thought of it before, but I now resolved to be upon my guard. Indeed, I thought that this halt would mark the termination of our walk, but I was mistaken, for, instead of returning to the Nautilus, Captain Nemo continued his bold excursion. The ground was still on the incline, its declivity seemed to be getting greater, and to be leading us to greater depths. It must have been about 3 o'clock when we reached a narrow valley between high perpendicular walls, situated about 75 fathoms deep. Thanks to the perfection of our apparatus, we were 45 fathoms below the limit which nature seems to have imposed on man as to his submarine excursions. I say 75 fathoms, though I had no instrument by which to judge the distance. But I knew that even in the clearest waters the solar rays could not penetrate further, and accordingly the darkness deepened. At 10 paces not an object was visible. I was groping my way when I suddenly saw a brilliant white light. Captain Nemo had just put his electric apparatus into use. His companion did the same, and Conseil and I followed their example. By turning a screw, I established a communication between the wire and the spiral glass, and the sea, lit by our 4 lanterns, was illuminated for a circle of 36 yards. Captain Nemo was still plunging into the dark depths of the forest, whose trees were getting scarcer every step. I noticed that vegetable life disappeared sooner than animal life. The medusae had already abandoned the arid soil, from which a great number of animals, zoophytes, articulata, mollusks, and fishes still obtained sustenance. As we walked, I thought the light of our Ruhmkorff apparatus could not fail to draw some inhabitant from its dark couch. But if they did approach us, they at least kept a respectful distance from the hunters. Several times I saw Captain Nemo stop, put his gun to his shoulder, and after some moments drop it and walk on. At last, after about 4 hours, this marvelous excursion came to an end. A wall of superb rocks and an imposing mass rose before us, a heap of gigantic blocks, an enormous steep granite shore forming dark grottos, but which presented no practicable slope. It was the prop of the island of Crespo. It was the earth. Captain Nemo stopped suddenly. A gesture of his brought us all to a halt, and however desirous I might be to scale the wall, I was obliged to stop. Here ended Captain Nemo's domains, and he would not go beyond them. Further on was a portion of the globe he might not trample upon. The return began. They didn't get anything. Unless they're going to do it on the way back, but this is a hunting expedition. They didn't get anything. The return began. Captain Nemo had returned to the head of his little band, directing their course without hesitation. I thought we were not following the same road to return to the Nautilus. The new road was very steep and consequently very painful. We approached the surface of the sea rapidly. But this return to the upper strata was not so sudden as to cause relief from the pressure too rapidly, which might have produced serious disorder in our organization and brought on internal lesions so fatal to divers. Very soon, light reappeared and grew, and the sun, being low on the horizon, the refraction edged the different objects with a spectral ring. At 10 yards and a half deep, we walked amidst a shoal of little fishes of all kinds, more numerous than the birds of the air, and also more agile. But no aquatic game worthy of a shot had as yet met our gaze, when at that moment I saw the captain shoulder his gun quickly, and following a moving object into the shrubs. There we go. He fired. I heard a slight hissing, and a creature fell stunned at some distance from us. It was a magnificent sea otter. The anhydrus, the only exclusively marine quadruped. I'm just mashing all my words together today. This otter was 5 feet long and must have been very valuable. Its skin, chestnut brown above and silvery underneath, would have made one of those beautiful furs so sought after in the Russian and Chinese markets. The fineness and the luster of its coat would certainly fetch 80 pounds. What is 80 pounds in 1967 to today? What do we think? A lot, probably. Can't do the calculation because you're on my phone. I admired this curious mammal with its rounded head ornamented with short ears, its round eyes and wet whiskers like those of a cat with webbed feet and nails and tufted tail. This precious animal, hunted and tracked by fishermen, has now become very rare and taken refuge chiefly in the northern parts of the Pacific, or probably its race would soon become extinct. Captain Nemo's companion took the beast, threw it over his shoulder, and we continued on our journey. For 1 hour, a plain of sand lay stretched before us. Sometimes it rose to within 2 yards and some inches of the surface of the water. I then saw our image clearly reflected, drawn inversely, and above us appeared an identical group reflecting our movements and our actions. In a word, like us in every point, except that they walked with their heads downward and their feet in the air. Another effect I noticed, which was the passage of thick clouds, which formed and vanished rapidly. But on reflection, I understood that these seeming clouds were due to the varying thickness of the reeds at the bottom, and I could even see the fleecy foam which their broken tops multiplied on the water, and the shadows of large birds passing above our heads, whose rapid flight I could discern on the surface of the sea. On this occasion, I was witness to one of the finest gunshots which ever made the nerves of a hunter thrill. A large bird of great breadth and wing, clearly visible, approached, hovering over us. Captain Nemo's companion shouldered his gun and fired, when it was only a few yards above the waves. The creature fell stunned, and the force of its fall brought it within the reach of the dexterous hunter's grasp. It was an albatross of the finest kind. Our march had not been interrupted by this incident. Period. For 2 hours, we followed these sandy plains, then fields of algae very disagreeable to cross. Candidly, I could do no more when I saw a glimmer of light, which, for half a mile, broke the darkness of the waters. It was the lantern on the Nautilus. Before 20 minutes were over, we should be on board, and I should be able to breathe with ease, for it seemed that my reservoir supplied air very deficient in oxygen. But I did not reckon on an accidental meeting which delayed our arrival for some time. I had remained some steps behind when I presently saw Captain Nemo coming hurriedly towards me. With his strong hand he bent me to the ground, his companion doing the same to Conseil. At first I knew not what to think of this sudden attack, but I was soon reassured by seeing the captain lie down beside me and remain immovable. I was stretched on the ground, just under shelter of a bush of algae, when raising my head, I saw some enormous mass, casting phosphorescent gleams, pass blusteringly by. My blood froze in my veins as I recognized 2 formidable sharks which threatened us. It was a couple of Tintorias, terrible creatures with enormous tails and a dull, glassy stare, the phosphorescent matter ejected from holes pierced around the muzzle. Monstrous brutes, which would crush a whole man in their iron jaws. I did not know whether Konsai stopped to classify them. For my part, I noticed their silver bellies and their huge mouths bristling with teeth from a very unscientific point of view, and more as a possible victim than as a naturalist. Happily, the voracious creatures did not see well. They passed without seeing us, brushing us with their brownish fins, and we escaped by a miracle from a danger certainly greater than meeting a tiger full face in the forest. Half an hour after, guided by the electric light, we reached the Nautilus. The outside door had been left open, and Captain Nemo closed it as soon as we entered the first cell. He then pressed a knob. I heard the pumps working in the midst of the vessel. I felt the water sinking from around me, and in a few moments the cell was entirely empty. The inside door then opened, and we entered the vestry. There, our diving dress was taken off, not without some trouble, and fairly worn out from want of food and sleep, I returned to my room in great wonder at this surprising excursion to the bottom of the sea. That is where we will leave it for today. So, as always, I will upload this on YouTube. It's KAreadsClassics, same name as this channel. It's all one word, no space. We will not be reading together tomorrow because I have to go somewhere for work. So, thank you for reading with me. Have a great day, and I'll see you later. Bye.